Welcome, everyone. We have just an hour of time, so we're going to try and get through as much as we possibly can. This is the return to office shared discussion for architecture firms. A couple things housekeeping things that we need to get through. First of all, the AIA antitrust statement. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. But we just need to make sure that we show it in large membership gathering meetings and let everyone know that in no way, shape, or form do we want to violate this, and that the board supports free enterprise and competition and strictly adheres to antitrust avoidance guidelines. Also, some housekeeping as far as courtesy. Please disable all cameras. Unless you are a panelist later on in this session. Keep your microphone muted unless you are asked to speak, and that includes anyone that is on a phone. People are saying that they don't have any audio. Is everyone experiencing that issues? I'm just seeing a couple people comment. I just want to make sure. Okay, so those that are not experiencing audio, I would think that there's probably something wrong with your speakers, and I would check your settings, please. We have a few minutes before we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar, so you have some time. Okay, and this is a non-judgmental atmosphere, so every comment here is meant to be in support of the industry and our professionals. I also want to recognize that many people submitted questions regarding job site visits. This webinar is specifically about returning to the office. There will be more information about returning to job sites that we'll discuss near the end of this session, but we are going to keep today's dialogue specifically focused around office environments and returning to it. I also want to make one other note. The words office versus work. We titled this Return to the Office because we recognize that most of you are still working. And so this isn't necessarily a return to work. This is just a continuation of work in potentially a different environment. And so our panelists and myself will try to keep those terms in mind as we move through today's discussion, as well as differentiating between PPE and just using the term masks. We feel that the use of PPE regards a larger amount of protection than just a mask that one might wear to help with the breathing in and out. So we're going to try to use the term masks instead of PPE today in respect for all of the medical professionals and those on the front line that are wearing that on a daily basis. All right, now with that being said and out of the way, I would like to introduce AIA Michigan's Vice President, Robert Hoida, who will give us a quick introduction to today's webinar.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for setting this up on fairly short notice. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to today's town hall discussion. Today's discussion is about, as Lauren said, returning to our offices and how that might happen. I don't know about all of you, but I feel like my office is a 2-inch by 2-inch icon on a laptop screen these days, and hope that'll change in the very near future. I don't feel quite as effective or as expressive as I might in person, and we're here to talk about some of our feelings today. Today's discussion is being led by members of the AIA Michigan's COVID 2019 Task Force. That task force is a group of members from all areas of the state and encompasses representatives from most of, if not all of, the chapters and sections and components of the AIA throughout the state. This was formed as a vehicle by which we, as our members, could share information amongst ourselves. We're certainly trying to do that. Really, we're trying to share information about the pandemic and its effects on the profession, specifically our profession and society in general. To me, AIA National has done a wonderful job. I've probably seen more value from AIA National on a practical scale than I probably ever have before. And that's, again, that's my personal opinion. not that of all of our board members or anything else, but I certainly have seen a lot of valid information, and would certainly urge you all to avail yourselves of the AI National website and all the things that are found there. They've done a great job of lobbying and for our federal government, and as well as some of our local members have done the same with our state government. The task force is really intended to be something that's more localized and focused on the things that are going on here within the state of Michigan. We've done that, and hopefully we're getting various scenarios that we can see and get opinions about various locations. Certainly the scenario in downtown Detroit looks much different than it might in Traverse City or Midland or Kalamazoo. So we're trying to encompass all of those thoughts and feelings from around the state in what we're doing. The task force has really got a two-pronged approach to its information gathering. The first is exactly what we're doing here today, and lending ourselves our opinions, expertise, and communication, really more than anything else, to our members across the state, and being able to let everyone avail themselves of the same information. The second and more global task is for us to gather information and make it available as well to show our members how they, as architects, can in fact become better community members and lend our expertise to the community. Several of the chapters have done that already, and I won't dwell on that today, but that's kind of our longer approach or longer term goal. Certainly one of our members said, people like CBRE and JLL and so forth have published handbooks that talk about the office environment or other environments and how they might create that separation in a safe environment. And it's our intent to hopefully do the same thing as well, as speaking from an purely architectural point of view. Today's discussion is intended to be about sharing of information. No one on this panel is here to say they have the answers on how to reopen their offices or when they will be able to do so. The situation is one that's fluid, changing, and will certainly continue to change as time proceeds. I certainly expect that day one of people going back to an office might not look like it will look like in 45 days or 90 days or even a year from now. So we're trying to develop ideas, and today's discussion is really about day one and what some of our offices and firms are doing personally to create that environment that's safe to each of our offices. And I think that may change, that may be different from office to office, and that certainly will be something that we talk about today and you'll see today. With that, I'd like to let the board member or the panel members introduce themselves, kind of talk about who they are, their firm, what size firm it is, and so that you get an idea of the point of view that from which they're speaking. So with that, I'll pass it on to Don. Don, go ahead and unmute and talk about yourself.
Thank you, Bob. I'm here representing AIA Huron Valley as its current president, and I've been a director of operations at some larger firms in the area. But currently, I'm working at a smaller office at A3C. We have 14 people, and I'm here to give voice to some of the unique challenges that face small firms as we contemplate returning to the office after our recent struggles with work-life balance and cabin fever. I will also add that this event and topic are so important to me that I turned on my camera so you can see me, and also because I put on a shirt with a collar for the first time in 2 months. And I figured that should be worth something. Thank you for attending, and I hope we all can gain some much needed and valuable perspective from each other. Thanks.
Thank you, Don, so much. Patty, please.
Hi, I'm Patty Boyle. I am the current AIA Detroit president. I am also a vice president and corporate director of architecture for SmithGroup. SmithGroup is a large international firm. We have about 1,300 staff in about 15 different locations. And working across a number of different market sectors. So we'll try to represent sort of that larger firm perspective, but with some focus on what we're doing in Detroit here.
Thank you so much, Patty. Chuck?
Hi, I'm Chuck Bultman. I am here today representing AIA Government Affairs. I am co-chair of that committee right now. I also have a small practice in Ann Arbor. I actually work alone ostensibly, except for other architects that we collaborate on projects. So much of my work is done remotely. And that's all.
Thank you, Chuck. Norm, are you with us today?
Yes. Hi, Lauren. Thank you. Yes, my name is Norm Hamann. I'm current AI Michigan president. Also representing kind of a smaller edge of the spectrum as far as firm size. We are Diekema Hamann Architecture and Engineering. We have 60 people over 3 offices. Our largest office has 30 to 40 people depending on the day. And our other 2 offices, one in Grand Rapids has 15 and one in Phoenix, Arizona has 20. So kind of the smaller perspective. Looking forward to sharing what things we've already implemented, as well as just trying to weigh options moving ahead.
Thank you so much, Norm. Michelle, are you able to join us right now?
I'm here. I'm Michelle Carroll. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys, representing really the human resources kind of view of what's going on with COVID and getting back into our offices. I head up human resources globally for HKS Architects. We have about 1,400 employees spanning over 25 offices globally. So really looking at this and what makes sense for all of our offices and trying to have a global mindset with it too, but also specifically for each of our offices and our employees and what their commutes look like and if they're taking public transportation. So a lot of considerations as we're looking to get folks back in the office. We technically never closed our offices per se, and we are excited that at HKS we believe we've been working remotely very well. And our employees have really enjoyed the experience. So we're even looking into when we are able to come back into the office fully, expanding some of our policies to allow our employees to work through a flexible work arrangement, work some days remotely. So it's been a good experience, definitely some challenges, but not something they ever teach you in school on how to navigate through something like this.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And you already heard from our AI Michigan Vice President, Bob Hoida. So Kim, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kimberly Montague. I'm a Vice President with HKS Architects here in the Detroit area and also an AI Michigan Director. So I work closely with Michelle and have been part of a lot of the conversations and discussions between offices and have a lot of colleagues that are working in other areas of the country and of the world. So it's been really interesting kind of hearing all of those different stories. But my perspective today is going to be a smaller studio that's part of a large firm. And I think we have some unique challenges in our specific location compared to some of our other colleagues throughout HKS, as well as some of the other larger firms. So I also look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Kim. All right, everybody, now we will get to the heart of today's conversation. So based on all of the questions that you submitted, we were able to deduce these 3 main topics through which all of our conversation is going to focus around. And at this moment in time, I am going to stop sharing these slides and ask that our facilitators and panelists turn on their cameras so that we can all see their beautiful faces and have a healthy discussion and potentially not interrupt everybody. So if you are a panelist, I would love to see your face. If you are not a panelist, please keep your camera disabled. All right, so let's get started with the questions. So this is for all of you, because I think all of you will have some perspective on this based on your firm. Is there a general timeline that you are planning on implementing for reopening your offices? Maybe we'll start with the larger firms. So Patty and Kim, if you guys want to talk about SmithGroup or HKS first. Go ahead, Patty.
Sure. So yeah, SmithGroup is working on developing timelines. It will be for each of our locations because each will be based first and foremost on what the local jurisdiction is saying about when it's appropriate to return to work in work settings. That said, there is they've crafted, our sort of task force on this issue has crafted a number of steps that need to be taken in advance of sending people back into the office environment. And the time it takes to work through those steps is at a minimum sort of 2 weeks, and that includes things like doing advanced planning of the space where circulate, to making sure that we have adequate supplies. There's, as you others may be finding, there is a sort of supply chain problem with getting face masks and even cleaning supplies. So making sure that we have all of those pieces in place before we start up operations in any office environment, we think will take at least 2 weeks. Having said that, we are right now tentatively scheduling our Dallas to come back in just a few weeks, the day after Memorial Day here in May. Detroit is started the process of thinking about that in anticipation of our end of month theoretical termination of our stay-at-home order, but we are, I'm sure like the rest of you, are waiting to see what the governor does in terms of holding that date and or extending it.
Kim, is HKS taking a similar approach?
Yes, I would say our approach is very similar to what Patty described. I think one of the things that we've been talking about pretty extensively is each of our studio members going into the studio at what we're saying is kind of shifts prior to the open to get the stuff off of everyone's desks so that we can do a deep clean prior to everyone. And when I say everyone, we'll talk perhaps about shifts later, but having everyone kind of phase into the office and clean out some of their personal items, take care of things on their desks so that our cleaning crew is able to go into that office and do a very deep clean before we are officially open at the office.
So Norm or Don, with your smaller offices, do you guys have any additional things to add to that answer?
Well, I will say that maybe with a small office, we have a little bit more flexibility with our timeline. And so we're already talking about the fact that we probably won't consider going back to the office, given the results of our employee survey. Nearly everyone's not in a rush to get back, and it's not really necessary for us right now. So the soonest we're talking about going back would be July 1st.
So Don, you mentioned a survey. So are firms using surveys to get a general sense from their employees on their comfort level, and how are you using the results to make health and safety decisions?
Yeah, well, we actually stole the idea from Patty, so maybe I'll let her talk about that. We just use SurveyMonkey, and they have some good questions, and it's a good format for getting surveys out to employees anonymously.
So
Yeah, Lauren.
Sorry.
Okay, Patty, and then Norm, how about that?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I thought I would just elaborate since they referenced the SmithGroup survey, and I know HKS has done a number of surveys as well. So yeah, we did do a firm-wide survey, and it was very interesting because we do a lot of surveys. It was the one survey where we got an extremely high response rate, so sort of unheard of high level response, nearly over 90% responded. So clearly something people wanted to talk about. And by and large, just as was mentioned before, most staff are still very anxious or moderately anxious about returning into the office. And we used that initial survey to gauge, what were the sort of pressure points for wanting to return or not wanting to return. We have since issued additional surveys to our staff to specifically understand who back and what those reasons are. We will use that as our model for getting those particular locations back up and running. And as an example, our offices, after we did the analysis of how many people we could fit in the space given social distancing requirements and utilization of conference rooms and safe space between desks, really could only accommodate 15 staff, which is a pretty small percentage of the standard number that the office accommodated. But in fact, after the survey, only 10 people were actually interested in coming back. I would agree, there's still a fair amount of hesitation that people have about returning to the work setting.
Norm, go ahead.
Yep. So like Don, we borrowed some of the information that Patty had shared with the committee. Also got some information from Quinn Evans on a survey that they did. So we issued our survey yesterday, and we'll be getting our results back Friday. We anticipate it's going to be, we've taken the pulse. We anticipate it's going to be very similar. Most folks are not in a hurry to get back. We actually went to summer hours. We usually go summer hours from Memorial Day to Labor Day, where we're 4 days. We started that 2 weeks ago, so a month early. It is likely that we're going to keep working remotely as it's been for the last month to continue through Labor Day, and then anybody that wants to get into the office, we're making accommodations for that. So right now we are planning on May 28th as a goal, taking all the steps to get it ready. And then if in West Michigan, supposedly we're still peaking as far as the COVID cases, we may see an extra couple weeks after that.
So I was continuing sort of along that line, Michelle, from an HR perspective, how do you balance different comfort levels of individuals without imposing on one person's level of comfort for another? Can you make people return to the office if they don't feel comfortable?
I think we're so fortunate in our profession that most of our employees are able to work well remotely. So I would have leadership question the why, like why are we rushed to get back in, and take it from that, that standpoint. I would caution to force people, if you will, to return, especially if they're not comfortable. If you are gung-ho that you want that person back in the office, I'd try to better understand why that person's uncomfortable. You have to be obviously very careful with what questions you're asking. You can't assume anything by someone's age or what you already know about their potential medical history or their family's history. But I would caution folks to force, people's comfort levels are definitely need to be taken into consideration. Fear is very real right now. And if they're able to work remotely and they're concerned about coming back in, I would definitely try and work with them to continue working remotely for the foreseeable future.
So with surveys out and getting a general sense of employees and whether or not they're comfortable, what are you guys doing to, as far as safety and hygiene protocols for reopening an office? Bob, how are you implementing social distancing at Hobbs+Black or at SmithGroup? How do you social distance in an elevator? Go ahead, Bob.
Our office is in a historic building and was set up many years ago with workstations that were really set up to accommodate 2 people with some pretty good partitions around them. And luckily for us right now, we're probably in a position where each and every person can have their own workstation, not to say that all of them are necessarily sequestered, with some pretty good partitions around them, but most of them are. We're working through a scenario that really looks to how many people can we accommodate within the office, and we think that's probably most of them. On the same hand, much like Norm, we're a medium-sized office with about 55 people in Ann Arbor, 8 or so in Lansing, and another 5 or 6 people in Phoenix. We're kind of handling all of them the same, and really finding that we're working, as everyone else has said, working remotely very, very well. And certainly going to accommodate people's thoughts and concerns. Personally, the team I'm working with right now, 2 of them are in Lansing anyway, And another one is working in Detroit, and we're working remotely much as the same as we would be if we were in the office for the most part. So there really is no rush. We're going to follow the state's mandates, state's orders, and areas like conference rooms will be adjusted with number of chairs. Certainly the break room is one that we'll consider carefully whether we use it or not. But I think our office, unfortunately, is set up that we can maintain distances fairly easily.
Patty, we know that SmithGroup is in a unique situation as you just remodeled one of your floors to be all non-dedicated workspace. So how do you maintain social distancing and safety guidelines in an environment like that where basically everything is collaborative?
Well, obviously that model is being adjusted, and what's interesting is in the survey that we recently completed to find out interested in returning to work, it was largely in the category of wanting or needing to collaborate, whether that was to prepare for an interview or to prepare for a meeting. And then the other category was because there are cases where people need to come back to work or feel like they are generally more productive because of what's happening in their other home setting. But taking that all into consideration, like as been mentioned previously, we have essentially turned down the occupancy on all of our meeting room spaces and spaces. We will not be utilizing agile work settings. If you're coming into the office, you will be given a spot to sit. If you're coming in regularly, you will have what's being called a safe seat, which is farthest away from circulation, is not immediately facing another person, and maintains that social distancing radius that we're trying to achieve. So we will not be allowing for the way that we were working in the agile work setting moving forward. You had mentioned previously the elevators, and I'll just say that I don't know specifically what the Guardian building is doing, although I have heard that they will be taking down contact information for non-employees that enter the building so they can do contact tracing. I know that in other buildings they are, limiting the number of people who can be in an elevator at any given time, and then installing cleanable surfaces over top of the buttons so that they can at least be cleaned more easily, more regularly.
So an elevator is one instance where you might be in a building that you don't have control of everything. So with HKS and Norm, with your firm, and Don and even Chuck, where you guys work, how do you deal with things like ventilation systems that might be shared, or potentially dealing with other offices that you might have interaction with their employees, but they may not have as strict guidelines as far as social distancing? Norm, Don, do you wanna start, since you guys have a smaller perspective?
I can start, Lauren. So just in terms of, we have two separate tenants in our building. It's likely that we will probably have everybody enter the building at one location, and we'll have people exit at another, just to keep that simple. We have not thought about the implications of, filters. Certainly that's part of the initial ramping up, making sure all our filters have been cleaned and replaced. But in terms of just how we're regulating, we haven't really thought about that yet. We don't really have that big of an issue with only two tenants. The other tenant has all enclosed offices, and they have their own meeting space, so there's very little interaction other than coming and going to work in the morning. That's probably the one pinch point we have. And so we think by designating two different access points, that will help.
So Don, what is your situation like?
It's very similar for us. I would say one of the advantages of a smaller firm is we see fewer visitors in the office, and having a visitor protocol in the office was identified on our survey as the top concern with returning to work by our employees. And so we'll probably take deliveries down at the first floor entry door and not have them come up into our space, and limit the number of clients and consultants that visit our office. Frankly, our conference room isn't big enough to accommodate more than 2 people safely anyway, so we're going to have to continue to meet like this for the foreseeable future. Another advantage of our office is we have operable windows, which many of the large firms don't. So we're thinking about turning off the air conditioning and opening the windows and bringing in some portable HEPA filters. So that's our solution at the moment.
Thanks, Don. I want to return to this idea that Norm brought up about using one entrance as an entry and one as an exit, because Kim, the Northville HKS location has a ramp that is one, but not a ramp at the other entrance. So what are you guys doing in that situation?
So obviously both entrances will remain open. They're required for egress out of the space anyway. But what we're doing is encouraging our employees that can use the steps to utilize that entrance and make that, and that has traditionally been an employee entrance anyway. All deliveries are going to come through the back entrance and just to the entrance, as Don said. We're not necessarily allowing delivery folks into our space, and previous to all of this, many of them would come in. If they didn't see someone immediately, they'd walk into the middle of the studio to make a delivery. So we're limiting access. We're providing masks and sanitizing station at both of those entrances. So when you exit or enter, just as you would in a medical facility, you know, it's in healthcare, they say, you know, wash in, gel out, or gel in, gel out, or whatever the phrase is. We're encouraging people when they enter and or leave the space that they would wash their hands and use the sanitizing stations. We are going to be providing masks for our employees if they choose to work in the office, in the studio environment. And I think I want to go back to something that Patty was saying earlier, just about the workspaces. We were literally beginning some discussions and planning to convert our studio, which currently has 6-foot cubicles, isn't that convenient, to a benching style of office environment with shared workspaces and what have you. Well, that got shelved very quickly, because generally what we found with the current layout that we have, we can provide social distancing between our employees with the 6-foot radius, and our team has done a great job of analyzing our floor plan to make sure that beyond just the 6-foot radius, we're taking other precautions from a design standpoint.
Well, thanks, Kim. You touched on a lot of topics there that I want to return to, but Chuck, I'd like to turn to you and see what your perspective is on some of these things.
So as a smaller firm, although I do share my entrance with 2 others, I am able to basically come and go from my space without interaction, and I have isolated mechanical equipment, etc. Although I'm not particularly concerned about the virus going through the mechanical system based on what I've read. But I also think it's, as a smaller firm, one thought is that it is important that we continue to clean our offices, which is something larger firms typically have some kind of service. Smaller firms sometimes think their offices are self-cleaning, but they're not. And we really do need to be conscious of that in smaller firms, that we pay attention to what's being used and follow up behind ourselves. Along those lines, I also started to think a little bit creatively, and I happen to have a private outdoor space that's just to my space. And so I set up an outdoor conference room, because I recently had to host a contractor meeting with a gentleman who had recently had a bout of cancer. And I was very concerned, but I had no choice but to meet with him in person. And so we met outside, where it was as safe as I thought it could be.
Thank you, Chuck. So I heard from Kim, and I think Patty mentioned mask wearing. Is for all of you, are you all going to be making mask wearing a mandatory policy for your firms and your employees? You can just nod if that's a yes. If not, I'd like to hear more. Okay. So Michelle, maybe this is a question for you. What happens if you have an employee or a visitor that does not want to comply by the firm's guidelines, whether it's mask wearing or other hygiene protocols that you guys have set in place? What do you do in that situation?
So I'll say one exception we're considering is if folks have their own private offices and their door is closed, then we're potentially going to allow them to remove their mask at that time. I will say that, but in the open studio, we're requiring masks right now. We have actually said at HKS no visitors at this time, so that is kind of our rule as we're figuring this all out. So I'm not sure how we're going to necessarily address the masks if visitors don't want to wear them. We are going to provide them, so we're going to have them at all of our entrances. But right now, no visitors. If employees aren't comfortable wearing masks, we're comfortable with them still working from home. In this environment, we actually are more encouraging them to continue to work from home. So if they're not comfortable, we're fine with that. We're not going to force it, but we're going to ask them to continue to work remotely.
Well, I do want to talk about remote working a little bit in the current context, but I want to stay on a couple things about the office. So what about kitchens and other common areas like bathrooms when they're shared? Obviously, workstations are one thing, but you can't necessarily avoid the restroom at an office. So I don't know who wants to take that first. Raise your hand if you want to dive into that topic. Go ahead, Bob.
Our office, for a few days prior to the actual quarantine and shutdown, had established a routine. We've actually got an in-house maintenance person who had been routinely at least 2 or 3 times a day cleaning. My point of view is that in an office scenario, we're working with people that we work with every day. And fortunately or unfortunately, we've all got family members we love or love to hate, but we're all kind of family and going to have to trust each other. I expect that, common areas like the kitchen, which is not essential, a break room, which isn't essential, it will probably not be used, or at least not be used frequently, but I'm expecting it not to be used. Areas like conference rooms will get cleaned more frequently than they would typically would be on a daily basis. They'll be more frequent than that, obviously, and probably won't get used very much. Certainly, we're going to expect people to communicate, via distance, whether it's by phone, whether it's by Zoom meeting within the office or whatever it might be. But we had established a protocol where at least 2 or 3 times a day we were cleaning handrails and doing some of those things, and I expect that will continue for the people who are in the office.
Does that include things as small as coffee makers or water dispensers?
That's going to be a particular, I think that's a discussion that's still going on. Obviously, those areas are very condensed and constrained. I'm hoping we don't have to make an appointment to get a cup of coffee, but that may well in fact be the case.
We have a comment from one of our attendees that they're in the process of remodeling their kitchen and bathrooms with touchless fixtures. Is anybody else in the process of considering making those changes throughout their office environment? Maybe, maybe not.
We've taught, I think, like Bob, I think our studio in Northville is, we're having many discussions about how best to handle all of those things. We have restrooms that are shared. There's 2 stalls, so we've talked about, do you essentially make it a single occupancy and put a occupied, unoccupied sign on the outside of the door, but then you have to touch the sign. So what do you do about that? And those common areas I think are very challenging. We've talked about coffee. Do we limit coffee? Do we tell people we'll bring your own? Well, then does everyone want to have their own little kitchenette set up in their cubicle, with a refrigerator and a coffee machine, hot water, so we're working through some of those things. I don't think that quite honestly, I'm not sure that we have a specific answer about how we are going to address all of those things as of yet. That's an ongoing conversation.
And Michelle, I saw you had your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, at first, in talking about kind of all of the HKS offices, I was really pushing for us just to close down all of our kitchens and all of those common areas. But the more we thought about it, and again, depending on our locations, we were more concerned about people then leaving the office to go across to the 7-Elevens and the Starbucks and the potential exposure there. So we are erring on trying to figure it out to keep them open, but having people social distance and then clean, you know, after, like providing all of the necessary cleaning tools next to the coffee pots and next to even our printers and copy machines where people are pressing the buttons, all of those things that people could touch, to have cleaning, you know, tools there for people to use before they, you know, use it, and then even after they use it too. So both ways.
So you mentioned like people leaving the office either for midday, but like also just returning home from work. What policies can firms implement as far as health screening precautionary measures without violating any sort of HIPAA regulations? What can a firm legally do to ensure that the people who are entering the office are as healthy as you can possibly assess in that situation?
So that's a great question. This has come up in a lot of my law seminars from an HR perspective with HIPAA. Because of COVID, some of those rules have been relaxed for COVID specifically. So we are allowed to do temperature checks. We're allowed to require them. We're allowed to require them before folks even come into the office, and then even when they get to the office, we're allowed to do, you know, the screening questions. We are considering at HKS anybody who's involved in, if we do screening questions at the front when people arrive, having them take, you know, a HIPAA webinar, you know, participate in a HIPAA webinar so that they are HIPAA certified. And being really careful with any of that information. We're not necessarily going to collect it all and store it somewhere. We just want to make sure people are safe coming into the office. But you're allowed, you know, to ask those questions and to do temperature checks because of COVID now.
Thank you. And Chuck, you had a comment on that as well?
Yeah, collectively, the conversation has gotten really close to making a point, but not quite saying it, which is that even larger companies, and I'm also comparing to very large companies, they are making a decision that certain small groups within the company are now going to be considered family. It goes to the issue of trust that was, you know, Bob had thrown out, such that whatever it is, in the case of your organization or any organization, that 4, 5, 6 people need to be within social boundaries. They need to be closer to each other to get their job done. And therefore, they can do that, but then they have to keep in touch. And if any one person in that group gets sick, they all get sent home and their families are all notified. So at some point, our pods have to get a little bit bigger, and that may be something that we have to consider as well.
So for those that might have special needs, health requirements, or children, and they don't have childcare, I'm assuming from the answers that I heard previously that firms will remain flexible for those people that need to work from home in the situation. How long do we anticipate remote working being a factor within the architecture industry? Is it the new norm?
I can take the first part of that one, Lauren. We have several in our studio who have young children at home, and with the canceling of a lot of even the summer programs, much less school, we've already determined that many of those, in fact, all of those staff members will not be returning to the office to continue their work. They are going to continue as work from home, and we're, you know, we have found, like others have said, a lot of our work has continued on. You know, we've reformatted a lot of our user group meetings and client meetings to Zoom calls and, you know, virtual meetings with Bluebeam and all kinds of other tools to be able to relay information. So we've already made that adjustment and that commitment that if anyone has a family situation that they cannot return to the office, either because of information that they don't want to share, or because of children that they need to take care of while working from home, that we are going to accommodate that through the foreseeable future.
Bob, I saw your hand go up, and then Patty will.
Yeah, as I mentioned, as I said at the very beginning of this, I mean, this is a fluid situation. I think, you know, the big dependency is certainly on others more than it is ourselves. And I think, you know, certainly over a period of time, the question is going to be, you know, you've all heard it, you know, when will schools reopen? When will those summer programs start to happen? So I don't think there's any choice really in other than to let people who have efficiently been working remotely to continue to do so. I don't see much choice in that. If you certainly need those employees and they're part of your trusted family anyway. But there's certainly going to be change, and things are going to develop over the next few months or through the summer. I don't think, I know none of us in Michigan, we all understand that the schools won't be open this year. We get that, and certainly have to accommodate that at a very minimum. And we've all seen that the summer programs are going to be pretty much going away as well. And I think, you know, September, you know, while I certainly think I know what's going to happen, it's still a mystery as well. So, you know, this is a situation that's going to change week to week, obviously.
Patty, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that dialogue that, you know, right now our firm is not requiring anybody to come back to work if for whatever reason, they are not comfortable doing so. And that one of the primary sort of guiding principles in all of our decisions, and this was alluded to earlier on, is like acknowledging that we're all sort of going through this together. We're all human, and that we need to be nice, to be equitable with one another. And that sort of means if you're in the office and you're able to meet with somebody, that you're sure that you're also making it available by video. So if that one team member coming in, they're still able to do that. I think just acknowledging sort of human side to all of this that we're experiencing together is really important to keep in mind as we're making all of these decisions.
And so can we look at the option to continue to work remotely as a positive factor, especially when it comes to potentially changing the industry perspective on maternity or paternity leave? Is this something that will make the industry more efficient and spend less on traveling? Do you think that it's going to completely change the way that we operate as a design industry? Does anyone want to comment on that? Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I would say from a talent perspective, this opens up, I mean, it's very exciting that, you know, previous concerns where people are located and maybe you couldn't hire an individual into your office because of where, you know, they physically reside. It opens up some doors and some questions, you know, could this work with you know, other individuals to join your firm that maybe don't sit, you know, close to your office. So I think that's an exciting thing. And I know HKS, we've always had a flexible work arrangement program, but I think it used to be considered more so with people with young kids, or as you mentioned, people coming back from maternity or parental leave. But we're opening that up. We have, to speak to earlier points about surveys, we've done lots of surveys throughout COVID. Every week we do a survey at HKS for us, from our research team, just to understand how the impact on our employee population. And there's a huge interest to continue to be able to work remotely, even when we're back to safely coming into the office, even 2-3 days a week. I think our leadership team is very open to that. It's been working well, especially if you have that trust, that level of trust. So we're going to use it. We're considering using that as, you know, an incentive, and as we're recruiting talent, from a talent perspective, have a more formal, robust, flexible work arrangement policy.
Thank you. Bob, go ahead.
You know, I think we certainly need to take this as an opportunity to assess the way we do business. I know we had a team member of ours whose husband took a job in another state. And as a valuable team member, we allowed her, even before any of this started, really to say, hey, you know, you can work remotely. Frankly, they're living in Jersey and under worse circumstances than we are. But it's been, from what I hear, pretty successful. So I think, you know, this is the opportunity to step back a little bit and look at, as we're all saying, really, how we do business and how that might change. And I think we've probably all learned some things via the scenario that we're living under.
Yeah, go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, just to add to what Bob said, I think we've certainly witnessed that for some folks, just having the flexibility is a huge thing to know that they can do that, moving forward. Some folks have said, they've been more focused, but I think it's a balance, not having to do it every single day. But if you could plan on maybe one day where you could do focus work and having the flexibility that you're still in touch, I think that is something that more people are going to consider now.
And we are kind of running out of time, so I just want to sort of wrap up with a few other questions that, Michelle, I know this is an important one. What should firms be considering as far as legal liabilities going forward, whether it's with providing things such as masks or requiring certain things of employees? What should there be any red flags that people should be on the lookout for as far as legal liability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously following all the government guidelines that have been passed down to our best measure possible. It's not going to be perfect. We are encouraging folks we want our employees to be comfortable, so we're re-emphasizing that. If there's certain cleaning supplies they want to bring in that they're more comfortable with, if they want to bring in their own masks, we're going to supply masks. But we had to consider that before we open any of our offices. Do we have these? Do we have the masks? Do we have the cleaning supplies at the bare minimum to open up and to say that we have these readily available and encourage their use? That's the first step. But in talking to, and I've talked to many lawyers during this time, just following those guidelines that are set out by the CDC and staying on top of that, that's what we're expected to do. And then anything above and beyond, that's great. But so I hope that answers that question. So bare minimum, I would say supply masks and the cleaning supplies. I would encourage screening questions before your employees come in, as well as temperature checks. Folks can be asymptomatic, we know that, but at least we're trying our best to protect the employees that are coming in.
And Chuck, you had a comment as well, and Don?
Yeah,
go ahead, Chuck.
As we go back to our offices, we have to also realize, and this is coming from government affairs, we have to realize that our legislators are going back to their offices as well. And over the course of the next number of months, while we predicted that most of the discussion at the state level would be about COVID, it turns out they're actually doing other pieces of business. And as professionals, we need to be careful and pay attention to that, because things that affect our licensure and how we do business will be coming up, and government affairs will be sending out notices.
All right, we'll make sure that all of the people on this webinar receive the benefits of those communications. Don, do you have a comment as well?
Just very quickly, I used to be a lawyer and I can't not say this. I just wanted to reiterate the obvious, that you can't ask an employee why their reasons are for them not wanting to come back to work. They're very private and we can't invade that.
Yes.
So obviously respect to all people and the comfort that they may or may not feel with returning to the office. Bob, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, and Patty asked me a question. I want to make sure that everybody knew that, reiterating the fact that this was being recorded, and you'll make that recording available. We'll also find a way in the very near future to share some of these resources that we've identified through the AI Michigan website. So some of the fact finding that we've done, we will certainly share that information for all of you, and certainly name its source so that you know where it came from.
Bob, stealing my thunder. So with that being said, let me return to the slides, and so thank you to our panelists for participating in the questions. And like Bob said, this is being recorded, and we will send out the recording as well as share the chat that has been happening throughout the entire session. So thank you for everyone that contributed to it. I see some questions coming in about product reps. That is probably under the same policies as the visitor policies that we talked about earlier. I do briefly want to bring up and respect everybody's time that next week we will be having a return to the job site webinar next Thursday, May 21st, and the registration for this will open tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. And again, thank you all for joining us. A special thank you to our panelists. We will follow up with our attendees with any resources that we think will be necessary and relevant to the discussion. So I just hope that everyone got something out of this webinar, and I appreciate everyone's participation. And we look forward to seeing you all again next Thursday. Thank you so much, everyone.